Thanks.
Thank
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Milton Board of Appeals. With me this evening, board members Jeffrey Mullen and Nick Gray. This is our second evidentiary hearing on this matter. It's April 22nd, 2021 at about 7:03, something like that. And we're at that stage of the proceeding where the applicant is still presenting its case. The applicant here is represented by attorney Peter Freeman and Alana Quirk, and Ms. Quirk is present this evening. And I understand from, excuse me, talking to Ms. Sutton that Bob Galvin, who represents the East Milton Residents Association, is also present. There he is. Hi, Mr. Galvin. How are you?
Good evening, everybody.
So I think without further ado, why don't we proceed with the hearing, and at the end of the hearing we can talk about the schedule for the next hearing date and witnesses and all of that. So, Ms. Quirk, are you all set to continue your presentation of the applicant's case?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to start off with Jen Corcoran, who's going to give a brief introduction and then hand it over to the various experts who are going to present the various reports this evening.
Okay. Ms. Corcoran, welcome back to the Milton Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back.
The floor is yours.
Screen.
Oh, go ahead. You're free to go.
Thank you. Just giving it a second here. Let's see.
No, take your time.
Oh, here we go. There we are. A lot of tabs open here. There we go. All right. All right. So great to be back here. And thank you to Chair Leonard, members of the board, Attorney Galvin, and members of the East Milton Neighborhood Association. We very much appreciate everybody taking the time to come out tonight and hear a little bit more about the residences at East Milton, which is our 40B proposal for a comprehensive permit located at 4 Franklin Street, among other addresses. But I think 4 Franklin will probably be the one we stick with. So as I mentioned last week, my name is Jen Corcoran. I work for the Joseph J. Corcoran Company. We're partnering with the Falcone companies on this endeavor. We're both Milton residents, Milton locals, natives, and pretty familiar with the area. So very excited to be working here in our hometown. So last week we gave you kind of a broad strokes overview of what to expect from the project, a pretty brief introduction. Tonight we're going to go a little bit deeper. We're going to begin with, I'm going to give an overview from the developer's perspective of kind of the things that we're focusing on in this project, as well as kind of our initiatives that we're taking to improve it. And then we're going to hear an in-depth presentation of the architecture, followed by the civil engineering, VHB, and then the traffic, Howard Stein Hudson. And so each of these two, so this is basically going to take you inside the actual comprehensive permit application that we submitted in November of last year. So all of this information can be found, I believe that the application in full is posted to the town website. I'm also happy to provide a hard copy to somebody if they'd like it. Feel free to reach out to us. I'll share some contact information later on in the show. I also just want to bring to everybody's attention that all of these statements will be peer reviewed by third parties that were hired by the town. So you'll get an independent third party review. We'll have an opportunity to respond to each peer review in writing, which we intend to do. And we're also going to be responding to the town comments that we already received. We received comments from several town departments on April 5th, and we are intending to respond to those in full. We'll touch on some of the issues that were discussed tonight, but there are obviously still many issues to be clarified, and this presentation is as much about kind of clarification as it is about, suggestions or presenting new evidence. So just want to put that out there that we'll be submitting written responses to all peer reviews, and we thank the town for taking the time to peer review everything. I think it's an important part of the process. So just like we had this slide last week, I just want to refresh everybody's memory. You know, the comprehensive permit review is really about making the project better. You know, we want that, you want that. I think that everybody wants this project to be as beneficial to the town of Milton as it possibly can be. And again, we want to hear from the town. I don't know how many people are in the audience tonight. I know it's school vacation, so if you are making the time, very much appreciate it. But we really welcome everybody to reach out to us and talk directly to us about concerns that they might have. I think that a lot can get done kind of in one-on-one sessions, and it's a lot less stressful than, you know, raising your hand and speaking in a public meeting. But this is meant to be kind of an in-depth review, as much about clarifying points. You know, the document is so large that, you know, despite the fact that there's so much in it, there's still more clarification that needs to be provided to the town to ensure that the impacts of the project will be minimal to the surrounding neighborhood. So, you know, thank you all for participating with us. And again, highly encourage everybody to visit the website. That's the best way to get in touch with us, www.residences@eastmilton.com. We really want to hear from you. So wanted to highlight again, we discussed this kind of during the project eligibility letter phase of the review, but I wanted to bring it back just to kind of emphasize the benefits to the town of Milton. I mean, first and foremost, the 40B is about reaching an affordable housing goal. We'll put the subsidized housing index on here. Milton is currently at 4.9% according to DHCD of the, you know, the dictated 10% that it's supposed to be at. And that's kind of why we're all here, right? If we were at the 10%, there would be no 40B hearing. Affordable housing is really important, especially to our company. You know, we work with a lot of public housing residents, many of whom are on wait lists that are thousands of families deep. So even 26 units of affordable housing in a great location, it does move the needle in a small way. And I think that everybody who, you know, can access this housing, you know, it's Milton's such a great place to live, and it feels right that we should, you know, open up the community and kind of provide more housing to people at different income levels. You know, it's in a great spot for not just affordable housing, but any type of housing. This is Milton's most walkable neighborhood. You have access to a pharmacy, you have access to the grocery store, restaurants, you know, bars, if you call them bars, they're really restaurants, but they do have bars there. You know, shopping, coffee, you name it. And without having to use up, you know, precious public parking, these residents will have their own parking space in the building. So I think that's something really important to add. $280,000 in new tax revenue will be going into the town's coffers. You know, we've heard a lot throughout this process about, you know, different issues, not only in East Milton Square, but in the entire town. And so that revenue going to the town is very significant. And most importantly, you know, the safe harbor, I don't think it's come up lately, but, you know, if a project like this goes through, it's going to be a full 1% towards the town's housing goal. And that will offer 2 years of safe harbor so that there will be 2 years in which there will be no 40B proposals accepted by the town. You know, that would allow time for thoughtful planning, you know, and kind of figuring out as a town, instead of having developers come and propose where to put the affordable housing that we need. That will allow the town to make the decisions itself. And maybe, you know, there's been so many studies, we've got a housing production plan. I think we're on a really great path right now. So having a little bit of extra time to really double down on that, as opposed to having to go through, you know, hearings about proposals, I think would be very valuable. So just want to keep all of those things in mind as we're moving forward. You know, the reason that we're here is because of the 40B program. And if we can meet that goal, it's going to be a step in the right direction from just you know, a philanthropic standpoint and a, you know, community building standpoint, but also just, you know, to give the town some time to breathe. So the development, you know, we saw this slide again. I just want to refresh everybody's memory. Again, we'll be getting into the nitty gritty of the application throughout this presentation. But it's located along Franklin and Bassett Street. It's going to be 101 units. Majority is going to be studios and 1 bedrooms, with also 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. According to the 40B legislation, the project needs to include 10% of the units as 3-bedroom units. So that hence the 11 3-bedroom units there. 25% will be affordable to households earning up to 80% of the AMI. And, again, 26 units of affordable housing in a walkable neighborhood with access to transit. This is really where you want your housing. 4 to 6 stories, 4 stories along Bassett Street, and then scaling up as you go more towards the business district. Currently at 113 parking spaces. I know that parking is going to come up a lot. We're planning on, coming up with some creative solutions to A, improve the parking ratio, and B, work with the town collaboratively to figure out how we can help to alleviate some of the parking concerns of the neighborhood. Another note about the unit count that I don't think we've discussed so far in depth. The 40B application, the comprehensive permit application, doesn't ask a whole lot about management, but management is something that is crucial to the success of any community anywhere, but particularly in a building like this. A lot of the comments that were brought up last week, I think, can be addressed through a management plan. So we'll be happy to provide something like that will provide details about where exactly we're thinking. But professional management essentially has the institutional knowledge to avoid problems and the expertise to address them when they arise quickly and rapidly. That's as important to, the renters. Maintaining renters is really mostly about good management. And that's something that our company really, really focuses on. So the 101 units, the density here actually allows us to have a more robust management program. The management will probably be a little bit, we can't have a full-time manager if we have significantly less units. So to give the best service possible and to be able to address any concerns, it really is crucial to have a full-time management staff there. And that's something that we're planning to do with this community. So just to take it to, East Milton Square and kind of give the bird's eye view of kind of how we're looking at this. It's a core belief of our company and also of, the project team that, a vibrant village center is a huge asset to a community. East Milton Square, as I mentioned before, is the largest kind of commercial district in town. And so building housing where people can walk to these amenities will be a huge asset. We're trying to kind of emphasize the fact too that, we're going to be not just building housing here, but hopefully building connections between different parts of the square that right now maybe don't have the very best pedestrian connections. So, as I said before, Sapir is going to go in depth into kind of our site plan and the architectural elements there. But I did want to highlight one thing. I think that, can everybody see my arrow here? Is that visible to you? Okay. So one thing that's kind of a creative public realm improvement that we're thinking of is this Adams Court improvement. So, Adams Court essentially right now is an alley. I know that there are uses that, trash and some parking spaces need some vehicular access is necessary, but I think that there are some creative ways that we can work with the town and the other, fellow retailers to build a really cool area there so that it's a real true pedestrian connector, especially with the new Manning Community Park coming in, connecting the Fruit Center to Adams Street, to the Manning Community Park. I think that would be a really cool thing. And this is the type of thing that, people get really excited about in, town planning, right? Kind of these cool, lit up things, there's lots of different opportunities for maybe public art. Obviously that would be something that we consult the neighborhood with, but this was just a really fun idea that we had that we think would be a real asset to the neighborhood. Another thing that I wanted to point out quickly, and Sapir again is going to get into this a little bit more in depth, but when we were envisioning this project, we were really envisioning how it was going to look in the landscape of like the future of East Milton Square. We talked last week about kind of the studies that were done about the square and how it's been a constant point of focus for really everybody in the town of, ways to improve it and ways to grow it and ways for it to be a more rich business environment. And one of those ways is, adding some housing there and kind of having more people on the street and kind of making it a more vibrant place. So we wanted to show right here. So in some of these renderings that you'll see, we have this, transparent block, and what that represents is the current as of right zoning in East Milton Square in the business district. So right now, somebody theoretically And I'm not saying that will be us either, because I don't want, it might seem in some of the renderings as if we're gonna, build the entire square. We're really not. We're just trying to build this one building. But theoretically, somebody could purchase the Abbey Park building and build it to 45 feet without having to go through a process like this. That would be as of right. And so we were looking at kind of, the future of East Milton Square. It's clearly becoming, with not just us, but with, fellow other developers, a point of interest. And so what might other developers think when they see East Milton Square? One of those things might be adding height. I know that there's been a lot of, planning processes going on in East Milton Square. And one of those things, might be added height. So we were trying to think of this building in the context of what's to come, which I think would be pretty cool. So just want to point out the site plan really quickly. Right here, you'll kind of see this connector, and this is really just how we're thinking about this. One thing that came up previously during the Pella phase as well was kind of the building orientation, and why could the building not be flipped to be off of the street? And again, this will come up a little bit later, but I wanted to give a quick preface about our thinking behind that. Number one is what I was just talking about. So theoretically, in the future, these existing buildings could go up pretty high. And then we would have a very small alleyway where those units on the side that were facing other buildings just would be pretty unrentable and, just not great places to live. Additionally, the site does slope up. So we're using the slope to build the underground parking underneath the building. And so to be able to provide the maximum amount of parking, we do need to utilize the slope and, this configuration of the buildings. We went through really every iteration possible. If we had flipped it or moved this back even, you'd be stuck with a retaining wall visible on Bassett Street. That was really unattractive and it didn't really look very good. So we figured a beautiful, very well done, architecturally unique building would be more pleasant to look at than, a giant retaining wall with cars sitting, above head height. So these are just some of the considerations that we've had as we've moved through these plans. Obviously, too, continue to ask questions because, for most of these things, since we've been kind of working on this project for such a long time, we have looked at a lot of different options. So we can very easily explain to you kind of why we chose one thing over the other. So without further ado, then that's my introduction. Again, I really want to emphasize that I encourage people to reach out. As you can tell, I love talking. I love talking to people. So really would love to talk to you about this project. So feel free to reach out really anytime. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sapir to talk more in depth about a lot of the things that I alluded to. Sapir, you met Frank Valdez last week. Sapir works with Frank at Demella Schaefer. So Sapir, I'll drive. And if you want to just give me a slide or what have you, whenever you'd like.
And the next, yep. What's the next one? Yep. Good evening, everyone. My name is Sapir.
Welcome to the board.
Thank you. I work for Demella Schaefer. I'll give you an overview of our design intent of this project. And on the right-hand side, you can look at the aerial view of East Milton Square, where the project is located. And in the zoning diagram, you can see the north part of the site, around 25%, is in the residential zone. And the remaining part of the site is in the commercial district of East Milton. And the site is surrounded, as Jen mentioned, that it's a really walkable, and all the amenities is around. You have restaurants, you have fitness, and you have wine bar, and also public transportation is around. And it's the proximity to the highway is also a good location for this project. And on the left-hand side, you can see East Milton Square is situated within the commercial district of Milton, and in the red area, so which is the remaining part of the site. And as Jen mentioned, that as of right, you can build up to 45 feet in height. And the next slide. And this just give a reference of what it means. And this is a view looking from Granite Ave, looking south. And on the left-hand side, you see dependable cleaners and looking into the gas station on the left. And this is existing condition. And the next slide. And this is looking into the proposed residence at East Milton. And this is the building with 6 stories and 4-story and the 2-story setback, and with the dry cleaner on the left-hand side. And next slide. And this is the reference of what if East Milton Square and the block, built to as of right 45 feet height. And the next slide, please. And what if some of the East Milton commercial district and the buildings built to 45 feet in height, and what would that look like, in the potential in the future? And the next slide. And this is another view looking from Adams Street and looking west. And this is the existing condition and at the intersection of Adams and Merchant. And next slide. And this is the view looking into the proposed residence at East Milton. And the reference for the existing chimney, smokestack, the height, and the mural at Abbey Park. And this is the proposed building. And the next slide. And this is what it means if East Milton Square is built up to 45 feet in height. And next slide. What it means the commercial district in the areas built up to 45 feet in height, looking on Adams Street. And the next slide. And this is a survey of the building around, and we design this building in keep in mind that the importance of the context, the buildings, the commercial buildings around the fitness center and the grocery store, and more importantly, the residential houses on the north side across the site. And next slide. So that's why this is many iterations, and this is many of the iterations, and we end up with we trying to keep the building pushed away from the residential houses. You can see on the left-hand side of the diagram, the houses, and we're trying to keep a distance, push the building away from it. And you can see on the right-hand side in the massing, and the top 2 floors we cut back, we push it way back, and the bottom 4th floor, which is roughly to the 45 feet height of the as of right building height. And the next slide. And this this is a rotation. So and on the top, the gray box on top is a fitness center, and Bassett Street is on the right-hand side now. So in the latest iteration, we even further push the building back. You can see next to the fitness, we have about 22 feet setback from the sidewalk. And in the furthest part, we have about 36 feet away from the sidewalk, and gives ample, green space along this, and East Milton Square is the, kind of the business district, we designed this building, and can fit into the residential as well as the business district. And on the back is the parking for the retail surface. In some of the latest the latest slides, I can show you the section and you can see how it works. And the next slide. And this is a site landscape plan showing along Bassett Street. We'll have green space, and we'll have I'll show you in the floor plan. We have resident units and the garden and facing Bassett Street. And on Franklin Street, we have the main entrance on the corner of Franklin and Bassett Street, and the back in the surface parking for the existing retails. And we also have a dog park and also have a bocce court next to the Adams Court Jen mentioned before. And next slide. And this is the ground level of Bassett Street. And in order to hide the garage, behind the building instead of having the garage exposed onto Bassett Street. And we put residential units on Bassett Street. And it's also appropriate for the residential area across the street. And we set back the units. And these units are 3-bedroom units, and they have direct access to the sidewalk and actually help activate. And they have a little garden, they can plant. So it's similar to the residential houses across the street in nature. And this is a 3-bedroom, and the utility and the mechanicals are tucked in the back of the next to the parking garage, and the parking garage is below grade, and you won't be able to see it except for the entrance of the garage on the north side of the building. And next, and this is the level up is sloping up is actually the access to the surface parking on the level above or from Franklin Street. This you have 37 spots for retail parkings in the back, and also the address of this project is actually would be access from Franklin Street, and because of the main entrance is on the level above, and the drop off and Uber drop off and delivery is all on this level, and the main entrance and the mailbox is on this level. And although it can be accessed from the lower level from Franklin Street, so we have but the main access of this building is on this level. And next slide. And this is from level 5 to level 6. And you see we set back the building about 27 feet further away from the residential neighborhood. And this terrace is not fully occupied. We'll have to decide with landscape along. So people will be limited, to closer to the building. So it won't be as close to the residential neighborhood. And also the balcony we have on the units below, they are Juliet balconies and facing the residential area, facing both Bassett and Franklin Street. And the balconies on the back facing the parking area would be projecting out because it's also south facing. So on the street level area, those balconies are Juliet balconies. And this units, and we decided building to have good lighting, wherever in the lobby, good natural light, and also the end of the corridor area, bring light into the elevator lobby and the main lobby area. And the next slide. And this is a section showing on the one on top, showing the garage and how we hide the garage off site and putting residential units on Bassett Street, and how the upper 2 levels further setback from the residential neighborhood, and the elevation below showing the elevation on Franklin Street, how the building massing actually the 4 stories appropriating the buildings around from the commercial area on Franklin Street and drop down to Bassett Street facing the residential area, and how the setback from Bassett Street, and also how this the units, we use the 1-bedroom units along Franklin Street, how this units help break down the module, in smaller residential scale, creating a rhythm with the living room and with the Juliet balconies, along Franklin Street. And on the lower corner, you can see the entrance, to the building. And on the upper left corner, you can see the access to the surface parking on Franklin Street. And next slide. And this is a concept rendering on top of Franklin Street at the corner of Adams and Franklin. And you can see on the left-hand corners, Abbey Park. And we try to use some of the, have some colors on the facade, to have some of the residential, and all this along the street level. These are using smaller scale material like clapboard, clapboard look cement panels, and create a residential feel of the building. And the window placement and all these modules are we trying to appropriate the residential scale of the building, and also of the neighborhood. And the next slide. And this is the view looking from the corner of Flanken and Bassett Street. And the front of the building, we try to put as much green space as possible, and also with the garden from the bottom ground floor, three bedroom units, and can also help livening, the streetscape, and give people taking care of the garden, and also keep the street active. And the top floor setback, from the street level, as you can see. And the next slide. And this view showing from the other side of Bassett Street, and you can see the fitness centers on the right hand side, and the building is broken down into more residential modules and rhythms along Bassett Street and the setback of it, and the living room and the Juliet balcony, and also the ground level garden help lighten the street. And on between our building and the fitness center, that's the entrance to Adams Court, and currently it's an alley, and part of the way we have to we decide the alley to make it more have more lively and safer environment for the neighborhood. Next slide. This slide showing a concept of what the alley, and we would make the alley more safe, and also make it easy to access, from the residents, can cut through into the other side of the square to the commercial area, and also help keeping this areas, this alley safe, is to increase the access, and also with some lighting and also the activities along, can keep the resident feel safe in this alley, in this Adams Court, and rather than it's just a back alley. So that's where we are, with the design concept.
Thank you, Sapir. And next we're going to hear from Connor Nagel of VHB, who's going to discuss the civil engineering plans.
Jen, can we hold on just for 1 second, please?
Sure.
Just see if we have anybody who wants to ask any questions of Sapir. Mr. Mullen, do you have any questions of the witness?
I'm wondering who owns Adams Court.
So the other, technically half of Adams Court is owned by the Falcones on the site, but then the other half is actually owned by managed by the Simon Company, but owned by the same owners, the Brugger's building that has the Fitness Unlimited and Brugger's in Kumon. So we'd have to coordinate with them, as well as obviously the town, just to figure out how this would all work out, and to be able to obviously accommodate the maintenance needs and everything that the alley currently serves. But that's something that we're willing to do and willing to kind of work together, because I do think that this would be a really cool asset and kind of open up, kind of connect the two sections of East Milton Square, so that you're not walking along Granite Ave, a very busy street. You can kind of cut through from the fruit center and kind of get everything all in one and just kind of build cohesion in the square. So it's a great question. We do have to kind of work on the specifics of it, but just wanted to see what people thought of it first, before getting down to the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. I think if it's going to be a feature of the project, and I know you're putting it out there for some reaction, I think it would be good to understand a little bit more about its character. Is it, ownership is one thing, but also is it a private way? Is it a public passageway? And only because to me, some of the attractiveness of of the idea is partly in its ability to be implemented relatively easily or hard. It's a little bit of a degree of difficulty. So even though it's been preliminarily proposed for ideas, I think it would help the board, certainly help me, to get some basics about its character, its ownership, and excuse me, a little bit of a process roadmap to what the applicant believes would be necessary to unlock this feature of the application.
Certainly, that's definitely something that we can look into.
Jeff, do you have any more questions of the applicant? I'm sorry, the architect?
No, I did have a question though, overall. The images that we were seeing about the footprint of the building at different levels. So let's say level 5, and there were 3 different colors. I couldn't tell. Maybe it's my computer is too small. Maybe you could, yeah, that'd be good. Just go to that. Go to the, no, I'm sorry, plan view.
I know I'm going backwards. It got a little bit
Okay,
stuck. There we go.
here you go. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So what are we actually seeing there? I see the colors, but the colors indicate the bedroom number, or is that?
Yes.
Okay, so is each block a unit?
Yes. And
Okay.
let's say the light blue color at the bottom, there are 1 bedroom. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 1 bedrooms.
I see.
There are 2 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms, and at the end, and the yellow ones are studios. And the purple area is corridors and lobby, elevator lobby. And the checker area, the gray area on the right-hand side, is a roof terrace that, is yet to finish the design. It's now just a concept, for the residents.
Okay. Go. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Mr. Gray, do you have any questions of Mr. Sapir?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, well, I don't have any questions, except if I could, Ms. Corcoran, could I just ask you one question? I don't want to pry into your business dealings, but the alleyway presentation seemed very dramatic and beneficial to the project. Have you had anything more than very preliminary discussions with the owners of the Brugger's building?
Not yet. No, we have not.
Okay.
My understanding is that the owner lives abroad, and it's managed locally by the Simon companies. And so it would probably begin with the Simon companies. I believe that the Falcones do have a contact there. So we were just kind of seeing first if it seemed feasible to the town from their perspective, and then would probably move forward with it. But during the hearing, we're more than happy to reach out and kind of start to really specify exactly how that would work. I like Mr. Mullen's idea of, the process for the activation. And we could definitely provide that before the hearing is through.
Yeah, I think that'd be very helpful, because it's such a dramatic element to your project that it would be heartbreaking to go through all of the hearing process and find out that there was some intransigence or some other reason why the owners of the Brugger's building weren't amenable to this type of development.
Right.
So let me just ask Mr. Galvin out there in virtual land, do you have any questions of the architect?
Yes, and I guess these kind of go back to the comments that I made last Thursday. We really have been unclear about what is proposed for what I see is listed as an amenity deck. And I heard Mr. Ng say that they haven't decided what they're going to do with it, but there's landscape planting out there, and there appears to be maybe 8 small plantings out there. But obviously, if it's at the 4th floor level or the 5th floor level, it's going to tower over at least in the corner that's towards Bassett and Franklin, it's going to tower over that neighborhood, and the noise and impact on the neighborhood from that is a significant concern. The other thing that I noticed, it was kind of skipped through quickly, is the entrance to the rear parking with 37 parking spaces. is identified at 10 foot 7 inches on one of the renderings. And I looked up the height of even a delivery van, and a delivery van wouldn't fit through there. So I'm concerned about the lack of access there, and there doesn't appear to be any loading areas in the back. And my concern is that if we don't have loading there, they're going to load on the street. And I have some pictures that I had taken, one of the residents took earlier today of Franklin Street. There's parking permitted on the easterly side of Franklin Street by cars. There are no parking allowed on the westerly side, but today there were trucks all the way from the corner of Adams Street halfway down Franklin Street, some of which were parked halfway on the sidewalk, others that basically constrained the flow of traffic on Franklin Street to one direction, one car width. A fire truck wouldn't even be able to access down Franklin Street under current conditions. And if there's not enough parking here, and I know they've reduced down parking to even what I've seen in other developments in Milton, our concern is that, again, people are going to park in the residential neighborhood, and there's going to be access issues around this area. So I'm concerned about that. And lastly, I do appreciate the renderings as to what could be built above the existing businesses along Adams Street. And my concern is, yeah, that's a possibility, but where would those people park? Where would they park their cars if they lived there? Where would they park their cars if they were businesses? And I would chance to say that there isn't any more spot anywhere close for anybody to park.
Ms. Corcoran, do you want to have the witness address those issues, or how do you prefer?
Certainly. I think actually the first one, the balcony one, which I'm sorry that we didn't incorporate into that, but I was hoping that would come up because we've talked about that a lot this week. So I think that kind of goes back to the management issue. And so for the balcony, and we've also talked a little bit within the greater context of it, of, the potential of having every resident sign a good neighbor agreement, because, we can make it contingent with the lease and partnering up with the lease that, you won't do the many things that the neighbors are fearful that the people who live in this building will do. One of the things that we can do from a management perspective is literally lock the doors to the roof deck after a certain hour. And we can work with the neighborhood on what hour that might be. We're obviously very sensitive. Honestly, I don't think that the building is going to be much of like a party building. I just, from a market perspective, I don't really see it. However, there are things that there are, provisions that we can put in place that can ensure that that doesn't happen. And so one of those things, this will be a fobbed building. So a key fob will get you into the building, into your unit, and into, whatever amenity spaces there are. At a certain hour, and this is how many professionally managed buildings do manage their amenities, the fob stops working to get out to the roof deck. So that might be, 8 p.m., 9 p.m., or whatever, we can work together on whatever hour would be amenable to the neighborhood. And then Sapir brought up a really great point. That deck is huge, right? Because it's the entire span of the units that we removed to accommodate lowering the height along Bassett. And so it's very big. So what we're thinking of doing is having significant planting and, shelving maybe, or, whatever it may be, but building out a pretty thick buffer to keep people even be like further away from the edge of the building so that, you wouldn't be able to see from the ground level or from the second floor of a home, even anybody up there. And, there are sound mitigating techniques that we can use to make sure that, sound is absorbed better. Again, too, if people are being disruptive on that deck, that's a management issue. We don't want that either, because that will also be disrupting the residents of the building. So noise is something that we're super sensitive to from a management perspective. And those are all things that I think could be pretty easily addressed through a management plan, which obviously we would love the input of the neighborhood on what appropriate hours those might be. So then the next point.
The rear, the entrance to the rear being 10 foot 7 inches.
Yes.
Wouldn't
Okay.
accommodate delivery trucks.
Okay, so in terms of the deliveries, that is actually a really great point, and we need to look into that a little bit further and see exactly, what Amazon is using these days for most of their deliveries. I know that there are a bunch of different kind of ways that you can shape that. But the point that we were making too, because I know that the loading situation has been, a resounding issue throughout this process. We did try to create that pull-in area off of Franklin Street. We're not sure, or off of Bassett Street, excuse me. We're not sure about the future of that because many of the comments from the town were, about the safety for pedestrians and, whether that was feasible or not. And we're taking those under consideration. And so in an effort to kind of have the spirit of that pull-in area by keeping, traffic that is, temporary traffic caused by the building off the street. There are ways to, when you put into Google Maps residences at East Milton, they'll take you, instead of bringing you to the corner of Franklin and Bassett, they'll take you to the interior courtyard of the building so that those cars aren't idling outside for, things like Uber Eats or Uber for people or whatever it may be. The clearance is something that we'll definitely look into and make sure that that is, something that can accommodate, the Sprinter type vans that are traditional, that are usually used for, Amazon deliveries and things like that. But one silver lining though of having this active driveway right here, this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is usually the spot where trucks will pull up on the curb. I've seen trucks do it too. And there are a couple points on that. Number one, parking in front of an active driveway. I think, most drivers are averse to doing that, for logistical reasons and just, it's very much against the rules. It's against the rules now as it is, right? And the second thing about that point is that, the conditions that are currently existing in East Milton Square, are almost somewhat separate from what we're talking about the impact of this building be. If things are already happening, trucks are already parking there, then perhaps we can be part of the solution. But if we're not there, regardless of whether the building is there or not, that's happening anyway. So that's not an impact caused by this project. And so I just want to be clear about that because, it can't be that this building is the cause for the problems that are already existing today. However, would like to be a part of the solution. So I think that active driveway is pretty good. We also, this is our building. So then we would have, a personal stake in making sure that nobody's pulling up on the curb on Franklin Street, because that is a major problem and it's already not allowed. So what can we do to increase enforcement of those rules? It's probably the same guys doing the same routes that do the same thing, from week to week. And when you don't get in trouble for it, you do it again. So I think that, it's more of an enforcement issue of the current rules because they're currently being broken. So, would be happy to kind of work with the community on solving that, because then that would become our problem too, right? If we're members of the community, then that, it's no longer just a neighborhood issue. It's an issue that we all share. So that's kind of where we're thinking on that. The clearance issue is one that we'll check out and we'll, address if necessary. But in terms of, trucks pulling up on curbs and whatnot, regardless of this development, there's, that's not really something that we're causing.
Mr. Leonard, could I just share my screen for a minute just to show you what it really looked like just today?
That would be appreciated. Thanks.
It would only take 1 minute, and I'd be happy to email that to Ms. Corcoran and anybody else. I'll do it right.
To Beverly Sutton.
Yes, Beverly. Can you see that now?
See it perfectly.
Okay. So this photograph was taken along Franklin Street. The buildings that are here, I guess, are going to be taken down. But you'll see there's the Gordon truck, the UPS truck, and the UniFirst truck, which I guess is uniform service. And these trucks, at least the UniFirst truck, that'll be right smack dab in the middle of that entrance area. And I suspect the reason they're doing this is there's no loading area on Adam Street during the day because those spaces are occupied because of the businesses that are open during the day there. And you can see what happens when you have parking allowed for residents and businesses that are also on the opposite side. The Starbucks is over here on the corner of Adam Street. It's only wide enough for a small truck and imagine if you had an ambulance or a fire truck that needed to get down Franklin Street and this was your condition. And that's very much a concern. I mean, everybody is familiar with the traffic problems in East Milton. And these neighbors that I represent certainly don't want Franklin Street becoming any worse than it already is. So I'll be happy to send that into Ms. Sutton and stop sharing my screen.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Galvin. Ms. Corcoran, do you have any concluding statements or questions? And I think I see Mr. Mullen has a question. So let's do this. Let's go to Mr. Mullen. And what's your question, Jeff?
I'm wondering what the parking enforcement ban is or situation is on the west side of Franklin. I thought that sign said no parking where the UPS truck was.
It actually is striped, no parking on the westerly side, the entire length.
Yeah, maybe the applicant can provide us, and maybe this isn't already in the form in the application, a better understanding of the parking permission on the block, because I'd like to understand if it's an enforcement problem or a just a massive density problem as illustrated by Mr. Gavin's photograph.
Yeah, I think actually we do have all the parking uses of that block that we'll be mentioning later tonight with Ms. Pike from Howardstown Hudson.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Let me, Bev Sutton, is there anybody else who has their hand up with a question?
Not that I can see.
Okay, great. So thanks to everyone for that particular presentation. Ms. Corcoran, whom do you wish to present now?
So Connor Nagel from VHB is going to be presenting on the site civil. And let's see, here we go. Oh, that's not
Good evening, Connor Nagel with VHB. Nice to see you again.
I'm Mr. Nagel. Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. Jen is pulling up the site plan that I can speak to there. I'll speak about the utility and stormwater connections. I'll start with the site overall. The site is a little over an acre. Excuse me. Slopes gently under existing conditions from south to north, which is from plan left to plan right. Plan has gone off the screen again there. There we go. So the proposed building, as you're aware of it, the sort of reverse L shape there along the north and east sides of the site. Utility connections may be a little hard to read on your screen, but they're shown there in color along Bassett Street. I know the Milton DPW engineering have had these plans and have provided some preliminary comment. They have not made any note of capacity issues, and there are none that we're aware of in terms of sewer and water connection for the project. So the proposal would be to connect with new connections to the main as is required on Bassett Street. In terms of stormwater, the stormwater under existing conditions, sheet flows untreated to municipal system in Bassett and Franklin Streets. The existing parking lot sheet flows to one catch basin that is just off Franklin Street on the site, and some of it goes directly out the driveway onto Franklin Street, all untreated to the town's drainage system. Under the proposed condition, obviously we have a parking garage under the building, so there's limited potential for direct recharge of the surface, even with the landscape areas provided. All of that would be under drained and excuse me, taken to the sand filter, which is the blue rectangle, I'll call it, in the southeast corner, the bottom left of the plan as you see it on screen. So the design, at the time we put this together, we did not have geotechnical information available. And it being urban soils, we didn't want to take any liberties in assuming that we could infiltrate. So we conservatively designed this as a detention system. The sand filter itself is sized so that we could comply with the governing regulations under this being a 40B, which is the MS4 requirements. That being treating 0.8 of an inch of the annual load for total suspended solids and phosphorus, required to remove 80% of the total suspended solids, or TSS, and 50% of the phosphorus loads. So that's what the sand filter is sized for. Then, being below grade, essentially in the garage, if you like, it's a vault, contiguous or side by side with the garage. We would pump the water from the output side of the treatment system, controlled to meet the peaks, to match the peaks, so that we don't increase any flow to Franklin Street. That's essentially what the proposal is that's in front of the town, that I know DPW have looked at, and we're anticipating comments from the peer review. To add to that, we have since obtained some geotechnical information on the site, and that has shown that groundwater is several feet below the garage floor, and that soils are conducive to infiltration. So our intent going forward will be to essentially take the concrete bottom off the sand filter so that it can infiltrate. And then we will significantly further reduce discharges, not just attain the peak, but reduce the peaks and reduce the volume to the municipal system in Franklin Street. That's really all there is to the drainage system. It's pretty straightforward. I'd be happy to entertain any questions now or at the end of the whole presentation, whatever is your pleasure.
My pleasure is to ask Mr. Jeffrey Mullen whether he has any questions regarding your testimony.
No questions, John. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Gray?
No questions, Mr. Leonard. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any questions, but I have to admit that this technical engineering drainage issues are not within my field of expertise, and I'll I appreciate Mr. Nagel's testimony, and certainly will look forward to the peer review of this. Mr. Robert Galvin, do you happen to have any questions of Mr. Nagel at this time?
I just have two questions. In the event of a failure of the system inside the building, how was maintenance performed? It looked like there was a set of double doors. I would assume that if the sand filter failed, you'd have a very difficult time hand carting out materials and replacing new materials if you couldn't bring in any type of equipment. And what is the longevity of such a system?
So the sand filter would not be accessed from the garage. The sand filter is placed under the underpass to the surface garage, or surface parking lot rather, under the building. So the manholes for maintenance would be there, the same with any regular sand filter on any other stormwater project. It would be a vac truck that would be able to remove any sediments and sands from that and replace them with fresh bedding, as is routine maintenance with stormwater.
And what about the estimated longevity of this type of system, Mr. Nagel?
We would recommend that the longevity, I mean, as long as it's maintained, there should be no particular lifespan to it. It should be assessed twice a year to check buildup of sediment and removal or replacement of the sand as warranted on those inspections. I wouldn't think that it would warrant being replaced even annually, but it should be checked twice a year.
Okay. And is this type of system, is it a typical system for an urban building on a 1 acre parcel?
With a subsurface garage where we need to provide treatment, I would say yes, there is precedent for it. Sand filters, and this is, while it's contiguous with the garage, it's not in the garage, right? So it's really a sand filter like any other sand filter, which are very common in stormwater designs.
Okay, Mr. Galvin, does that answer your questions?
And if I might ask, has anybody evaluated why downslope on Franklin Street, there are residents that have so many drainage issues and report flooded basements? And I know it's not on site, but there's at least a belief on the part of some of the residents that live a little bit at a lower elevation that some of the things that run off this site contribute to the flooding that they experience further down the street.
I am not familiar with the flooding down the street, but obviously, starting from the top, it rains equally on all the properties around here, and it runs off the same from all of them. This one right now, under existing conditions, does not have a treatment system. Under proposed conditions, it would. That will remove nutrients and sediments, which in all likelihood is what is sort of undermining the town drainage system. I can't say that for sure without knowing it, but I don't know what the maintenance routine is for the town's stormwater system, whether the lack of capacity is just that pipes are undersized or whether there is some buildup somewhere. But I can say with this proposed system that we would not increase the runoff. We would not exacerbate their problem in any form. And we would certainly be removing sediments and thereby improving what's coming off our site.
May I ask one further question?
Yes, of course you may.
What percentage of the site is impervious and what percentage of the site is landscaped or open space?
I believe we have, we're about 85% impervious, 15% landscape.
Thank you.
Mr. Nagel, let me just ask you one more question. I know this is a preliminary stage of this application and you're just making your basic preliminary presentation. But as we get into the peer review stages here, do you anticipate the applicant will be further investigating the possible runoff issues associated with the project and be working with the town to ensure that those conditions are not exacerbated by the construction of this building?
From the point of view of our site, yes, we will be working with responding to the peer review and any improvement they can see that we should make. The town's peer review engineer will be certainly working with DPW and making sure that we comply with the applicable standards, the MS4 requirements, and we will not be increasing peak rates of runoff, and we will be reducing contaminants in the stormwater, particularly suspended solids, which are what clog up drain lines. So I have no doubt that the stormwater from the proposed project will be an improvement over the existing condition.
And I take it from your answer to the question that if Mr. Galvin had pertinent information to provide regarding stormwater runoff issues that may adversely affect adjacent neighbors, that he should be welcome to provide that information to you and your team. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Mr. Leonard, could I ask a question?
Yes, that sounds like Mr. Gray.
It was Mr. Gray. Thank you. Mr. Nagel, did the geotechnical survey provide any information as to the nature of the soil that is underneath the proposed building? Are we looking at glacial till? Are we looking at clay? What's the composition? Can you enlighten us at all?
I believe there was a layer of fill near the surface, which would be removed by virtue of the parking garage that's going in there. and the underlying soils were glacial outwashes, which were sands and gravels, which appear to have a good percolation rate that we're pretty confident that we'll be able to infiltrate into once.
Right. So when your sand filter bottom is removed, as it were, and the water is therefore flowing into the subsurface soil, that's the nature of that soil is such that it's likely to be permeable to water and allow the sand filter to empty adequately into the groundwater system. Do I have that correct?
Yes, you do. That's correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right, Ms. Sutton, is there anybody present who has their hand raised with any questions of Mr. Nagel?
I am unable to see because of the slide. I can't see any people. Let me see.
I don't see any hands up.
Leonard, Attorney Bob Galvin, one more question. If you indulge me. Milton has a stormwater bylaw, which is a local bylaw, and I understand it's not a state standard, but has there been any attempt to identify whether this project would comply with the stormwater bylaw in Milton?
I believe it would. It also is not subject to the state stormwater management standards, but we have reviewed those also. And to the extent that we can, we're complying with all of those. The only one we're not complying with the application submitted is the recharge requirement of the state standards, because we weren't sure of what the soils would be. Now that we are, I believe we will be able to meet that too, even though, as I say, it's not strictly a requirement.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Nagel. We appreciate your participation and your testimony.
Thank you.
Let me go back to the boss, Ms. Corcoran. Do you have another witness you want to present?
Yes, I thought you were the boss, but that's a lot of pressure now.
No, you're running a wonderful meeting, and I hope they're paying enough money to work these signs and all of the technology that you're doing.
The technology is often the toughest part of the job, so thank you very much. I will work that up the chain and tell my boss that I deserve a little increase. So next up, we've got Carrie Pike from Howard Stein Hudson, who's going to be discussing the traffic impact study that was submitted as part of the comprehensive permit application.
Great, Ms. Pike.
Good evening. Thank you.
Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. Carrie Pike, principal at Howard Stein Hudson, and I'm just going to take you through the traffic study that we submitted. I will also note as I go through my slides, there are a few places where we've made a couple of updates because we did just get the peer review from the town's traffic consultant. So we're going to be working through those comments as Jen mentioned earlier, and we'll be submitting written responses, but I do have a few updates. So this first slide is just, we presented this last week as well, just a reminder about sort of the process and the types of things that we look at in transportation impact analysis, collecting data, analyzing that data, looking at potential mitigation. Other items include the crash data, looking at parking, access and loading, which we've talked a little bit about already tonight. So if you could go to the next one, Jen. So the study area basically includes the streets immediately surrounding our site. So we have Adams Street, Franklin Street, Bassett Street, as well as a couple of intersections on Granite Avenue. And you can see those there. The signalized locations are the ones on Granite Avenue. And then if we go to the next one, so we had Mr. Mullen, I believe, had brought up the question about the on-street parking regulations. So this map shows those on-street parking regulations, and the areas that are shown as red, those are areas where there's no parking. So the area where we saw the photo earlier on the west side of Granite Street is a no parking zone, and it is signed that way. The areas with the little dashed green lines are areas where 2-hour parking is allowed. So that's on the opposite side of Granite Street, on the east side, opposite the site, as well as on Bassett Street. And then there's a few other different regulations, a few places where there are bus stops, a couple of places where there is handicap parking, a few loading zones, but not many, maybe, and it looked like from the photo, maybe not enough for what's going on in East Milton Square right now. So you can see the variety. There are actually a few places where there are 30-minute parking spaces as well. So, and 15-minute. So we did also take a look back at the parking occupancy data that was collected during the initial phase of the deck project. So the data is from 2010. It did show that there is some availability in both the on-street parking as well as the off-street public parking that's available, that varies from maybe 15% of the spaces to 40%, depending on time of day and day of the week, that were available. So it seems like there is a little bit of float in the parking availability, but not a huge amount. Can you go to the next one, please? As part of the study, we also took a look at public transportation in the area. So there are 3 bus routes that pass through East Milton Square. They are the 215, the 217, and the 245. And all 3 of those connect to Quincy Center to the Red Line. So if someone were to take those buses, they could connect to the Red Line and into downtown. Next one. Then one of the things that we do is we project how much traffic a particular type of development is going to use. And so this is based on, in this case, because it's a residential project, it's based on the number of units in the project. And the Institute of Transportation Engineers publishes trip rates by land use. And there's 3 very thick books that live in our office that have all this data in it that they've been collecting for years and years and years, like more than 30 years. There's been numerous updates to this reference over that time. And so based on that, we calculate the number of expected trips for this size of a residential project. And so you can see here on the slide, in the morning, we're expecting 36 vehicle trips. And then we also take those trips and we extrapolate how many might be on transit and also how many might be walkers and bikers. And that's done actually based on US Census data for this area in specific. So that's based on how many people based on the census information use those modes, for example, to travel to and from work. So in the morning, we have 36 vehicle trips and we're projecting 8 transit trips. So that's 8 people taking transit, coming or going, and 4 walkers and bikers. So small numbers, but that reflects the census data that's available in this area. And then in the afternoon, the total trips are 45 vehicle trips, 9 transit trips, and 5 ped bike trips. And then the map on the right shows you the distribution of how we expect the vehicle trips to move around the neighborhood, presuming that a lot of those trips, particularly in the peak hours, if we were not in COVID, would be coming and going to work. So you can see, for example, if you look at Granite Avenue northbound exiting, you can see a lot of the traffic we expect to use that method to leave that route to leave the neighborhood. So taking those percentages then and extrapolating them, if you can go to the next slide, please. We calculate how many of those trips are at each intersection in the study area. And so that's what this little line diagram shows. So you can see, and this is actually one of the pieces that is updated from what was in our study that we filed in November. Previously, we had only had 1 access to parking. And so one of the comments from the peer reviewer was that we should update this to reflect that we have 2 separate parking facilities. There's the surface lot and the garage, and the 2 are not connected. So you can't drive into the surface lot and then connect down to the parking garage. So we redid the math for distributing those trips for both the morning and afternoon. So you can see we have 9 trips coming out of the surface lot in the morning and 2 going in, and then from the garage driveway, which I just realized I'm pointing and you can't see me pointing, but it's not helpful. From the garage driveway, thank you, Jen. We have 19 leaving the garage and 6 coming back in the morning. And then those are, filtered through the rest of the intersections in our study area network there. If you go to the next one, we've done a similar exercise. Oh, we're missing a slide. Oh, there it is. Okay, there it is.
That was likely my fault, so apologies.
That's okay. No worries. I was having a moment of panic because I thought I forgot to put the slide in. Because this was a new graphic that my graphics team just did for me today. So, so again, you can see how the trips are filtered through the street network. Again, up in the top here, 28 entering, 17 exiting. And at the surface lot, we have, and this is in the afternoon now, so more likely people are coming home than going out. So 6 exiting and 9 entering. And then at the garage driveway, we have 11 leaving and 19 coming back. So it's more geared toward folks coming home from work. And then if we go to the next slide, I'm just gonna, probably should have put this before the trip, but this shows you those, and that now our graphic is rotated. So north is kind of to the right on the slide. And so our surface lot entrance is down on the bottom there off of Franklin Street, and the garage entrance is off of Bassett Street on the right side. We've also indicated the residential accesses. So there's one from the surface parking lot interior to the L, and then there's one on the outside at the corner of Franklin and Bassett. So those are where how folks would be getting into the building. If you can go to the next one. Okay, and then I know that Attorney Galvin had a question last week regarding the Franklin Street traffic volume. So we did take a specific look at those numbers, the existing volumes, as well as how many trips we're projecting to use Franklin Street. And so that's what this summarizes. So in the section between Adams and Bassett, which again is where one of the site driveways is located, the one that goes to the surface lot, we're projecting 3 trips northbound and 8 trips southbound in the morning. And you can see there on the right side the percent increase in each direction. So the highest percent increase is in the morning, southbound on Franklin, so heading towards Adams Street, and that's a 15% increase. You know, part of that is just the way math works, that because the number of people heading southbound in general on Franklin Street is smaller, you know, the percentage looks larger, but then you can see the rest. And then if we look north of Bassett Street, on the section of Franklin north of Bassett Street, we're projecting very small numbers. That would not be a route that most people would use to travel anywhere around. If you could go to the next one. So then we take all of those trips and the traffic volumes, and we look at the control at the intersections and study area, and we do what's called a capacity analysis. So this looks at how the intersections are operating, and it's like a letter grade in school. So A is very good and F is not very good. And so you can see here, and we do this for 3 conditions. So we look at the existing condition. In this case, we actually projected our volumes following a process that's was laid out by MassDOT last year as the pandemic was kind of winding up, to project to 2019. So this we did not take any new traffic counts because of the pandemic, but we look at existing. So that's the first letter in the row. Then we look at what we call a no build, which includes other development projects that might be in the area that are that have already been approved, that potentially add traffic to the area. It also, the no build condition and the build condition also include any public works type of improvements. So for example, the improvements that are currently under construction for the deck, those are incorporated in our analysis of the no build and build conditions. And so you might notice that here at Granite Avenue and Boulevard, we have a level of service F in the existing condition, and then we have level of service C in the no build and build conditions. And that's because the no build and build conditions reflect that the deck project is complete, and that what the new signal timings and all of the improvements that are being done are going to make things better. And so that's based on the project's plans. But you can see at the other locations throughout here, generally we have pretty good levels of service. For the intersections that are stop controlled, this is not actually an overall intersection level of service. Our methodology doesn't actually give us that for an unsignalized location. It gives us only a letter grade for each approach of the intersection. So these letters actually are the worst, whichever approach is operating the worst. And that's usually the one that is controlled by the stop sign, or the two that are, if it's a four-way stop or a two-way stop rather. Usually that's because the traffic that, for example, here at Adams and Franklin has to stop, Adams does not. So typically you don't see a lot of delay on the main street movement, if you will. So in this case, that would be Adams Street. So you can see we do have a little bit of a change here at Adams and Franklin. And then if we go to the next one, Jen, that was the morning. And so then this is the afternoon. You can see things are much better in the afternoon. Again, we have that F going to C at Granite and Boulevard, primarily because of the deck improvement project. But generally speaking, in the afternoon, the traffic volumes are and the operations are pretty good, even with the project trips, which, as you saw a few slides ago, are pretty pretty low numbers. And then the last thing I'll cover, I think this is my last slide, is the next one, is we looked at crash data for all of those intersections that we just showed you on the map. And I know there's a lot of data on here because we look at a bunch of different things. We look at what kind of crash, was it a rear end crash? Was it an angle crash, side swipe? We looked at road surface, at the lighting conditions, at the severity. And generally speaking, we didn't find, there are not a ton of crashes, which is good news. It means generally the area is pretty safe. The one intersection, the other thing we do is we compare this crash rate, which is the number of crashes divided by the volume. So basically it gives you a crashes per entering vehicles. And we compare that to MassDOT District 6, because Milton is in District 6 rates. And so you can see for an unsignalized location, that average crash rate is 0.52. The crash rate, for example, at Bassett and Franklin is 0.19. So it's significantly lower than the average rate for the whole of MassDOT's District 6. The only one, and you can see it there in red, that was a little bit above the average crash rate is Adams and Franklin. And so your peer reviewer, the town's peer reviewer, has actually asked us to take a look at that and look at those data in more detail to see if we can ascertain if there's any particular thing that some kind of design improvement might fix. So we will be doing that, and that will be part of our peer review response. And that's my last slide. So thank you very much.
Oh, great. Thank you. Let me see if my colleagues have any questions. Mr. Gray, do you have any questions of Ms. Pike?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mullen, please.
I wonder if we're going to hear more about the parking plan. Is that part of the traffic analysis?
So we haven't done a lot in terms of looking at in detail at demand. It is also one thing that your peer reviewer asked about as well. So I think, as Jen indicated earlier, we are going to be doing some more work on that, and we'll have to come back to you with it.
Okay, so I just have some thoughts on it. I mean, as you know, at the top of this hearing, Ms. Corcoran indicated that this is where you want your housing, partly because this is where we've got some good transit connections and some activity. And you showed a slide that, we've got 3 bus routes for the T, which can, I know connect to Quincy, but also, that 217 runs up and over the hill a couple times in the morning up to Ashmont.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think the 245 goes over to Mattapan, which could connect to Forest Hills pretty easily. So you've got some, if people are willing to commit to it, you do have some decent MBTA access.
Mm-hmm.
I was a little disappointed in the mode share. It feels to me like we've got not enough people taking transit. And I'm interested in the demand plan and what the applicant is doing to incent the people who are going to live here to not have a car, to not use parking, to be green. So I haven't heard any of that. I've got all kinds of questions about that. And I know that Milton in general doesn't have a lot of experience with that, but I feel like this is where you could get experience. And I want to encourage the applicant, perhaps tonight's not the night to debate the point, but I want to put the seed out there, and I want to encourage the applicant that, every trip is going to matter here, given the congestion that the square experiences. I think, the metaphor that I would use for this is, I think you've got a glass that is largely full all day long and is overflowing. It's, in the peak hours. So every little bit of improvement will help. And certainly we don't want to add or exacerbate or unnecessarily add or exacerbate to the condition. So I really want to drill down on limiting those trips and leveraging the MBTA to the extent we can, and disincenting people to park. So I'm interested in a pricing plan and MBTA subsidy passes, and it's great to give people a welcoming kit and say, here's what you can do. I think we need to do a little bit more. So that's my speech.
Mr. Leonard, if I could respond.
Oh, absolutely.
On one point. So you asked about the mode shift, and we did not take any credit. We just carried the same mode split that currently exists today. So obviously, if we can incorporate some of those TDM measures that you were, that's transportation demand management. Sorry, forget that everybody doesn't know the lingo. Those TDM measures that you just were talking about, I think we could, but we didn't want to show a better, we wanted to give you the worst case in terms of the traffic numbers.
Okay. Well, let's have a conversation about what we can do to drive demand down. I see Mr. Sawicki's got his hand raised, so he's probably got a million questions in this area. But I also, this is probably my own personal objective, is to get the 217 to run more trips, especially in the AM. The beauty of the 217 is you're connecting both arms of the red line. Mm-hmm. It's a jitney, and I see it come up and over the hill in the morning, and it gets through Lower Mills fairly quickly. So I feel like there's a little bit more to do on with the T. Perhaps that's not central to this issue, but I do think every trip matters, and that's the point I wanted to make. So that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Mr. Galvin, do you want to be heard on traffic issues at the present time?
Yes, and these are just kind of observations and maybe a question. So my understanding from my clients is that there are 3 bus routes. The 245 runs to Quincy Center, and that's a bus that runs every 30 to 40 minutes. The 217 only runs 3 to 4 times a day. It runs to Ashmont, but functions basically as a bus for Fontbonne. The 215 theoretically runs every 30 minutes, but my clients tell me that it's not running every 30 minutes, and that one's to Ashmont at Quincy Center. The buses don't have their own dedicated lanes, so when they're stopped, they're stopping traffic while people alight or enter the buses, and that we feel is probably a large part of the problem up there anyways. But we think it is not a successful traffic unless you just don't have a car, because it takes you somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes just once you get on the bus to basically get to downtown. So it's not a really desirable way to get in. It's still more time effective to get in your car. I read the traffic report from Mr. Dirk, and it looked like they didn't feel like you had enough parking spaces, and were advocating that there be 118 spaces. And it looked like when they measured the size of the spaces, they felt you had more than 25% of the spaces as compact. So in actuality, it looks like there's actually less parking as a practical matter than you really need to have there. And again, this kind of goes to my point. We're concerned about congestion from cars that won't be able to park on site. And if I wasn't mistaken, I thought I heard that you needed between 15 to 40%, or there was a possibility of availability of 15 to 40% of the residential spaces on the Franklin Street side for potential residential parking there. My clients tell me that that's not the case because people will park there and walk up to Adams Street or to the Starbucks. So because the commercial parking lots are only available to people that are actually are patronizing some of the businesses. So we don't know that that's even available, and that would push more vehicles into the neighborhood, potentially being left there overnight. So that concerns us. So
I think you misunderstood the 15 to 40%. I was just stating that in general, in the square, depending on which street you're looking at, based on the data from the deck project from 2010, which is obviously dated, there appeared to be some amount of on-street availability, depending on, again, time of day, day of the week. I'm not advocating that we would want to use that capacity. I'm just saying that there was some limited amount.
Okay, all right. And if I understand you correctly, if there's just over 100 parking spaces here associated with the site, you're saying only 28 of the vehicles that are parked there are going to leave during that peak hour? Is that what you're saying? Either they're leaving either to the north or to the south and heading westerly on Bassett or heading southerly on Franklin and again going up to Adams? Is that 28 total?
I believe, depending on which peak hour you were looking at, yes. And then, the calculations that we do are for 1 hour. So obviously not, especially nowadays where people have more flexible work schedules, not everybody necessarily leaves in the same hour. So you might, like, I know in our office, when we were in our office, people could start anywhere from 6:30 in the morning until 10 a.m. So you might have, the most concentrated hour is what I gave you, but it's probable that you have some people that are leaving earlier than that hour. Some people are leaving a little later than that hour. So, for the 76 and 37, I think it is in the split of surface and garage, presumably some more of those spaces would be vacated in the hours on either side of the peak.
I just had two other questions. Has your analysis contemplated what would happen if, as we saw in the renderings, Adams Street, those buildings were built out to their as of right heights, and what would happen in this area? Because I know you've talked about a 5-year condition going forward, but I assume that doesn't include the addition of additional stories to those buildings. Is that right?
That is correct. The standard procedure is that we only include, when we look at the future condition, we did incorporate a growth rate, which is part of MassDOT's process, the standard process that we use for traffic studies like this. And that's meant to account for things like that, where you don't have specific development, but things like that where, there's some unknown, something like, okay, we're going to add 2 stories to those buildings that could be done as of right. So that it's taken into account that way, but it's not taken into account in specific. Like, we didn't go block by block and say this building could probably add X number of units and this one could, in 2 floors. And so we didn't do it in specific that way.
The last question I had just had to do with what I mentioned before, and had to do with how would someone load and what type of vehicles would fit through to the open deck in the interior of the site. And it really doesn't look like there's any loading spaces up there where anybody could bring something in to load. And then I was told at some point, and I think my clients were told, that there would be some ability to load at the corner of Franklin and Bassett in some type of an off-street lowered area that people could load in if they were getting an Uber, or if someone was making a delivery, like a food delivery, they could pull off the street. There's no loading spaces on the plans that I can see at this point.
I think that's correct. And as Jen said earlier, that's something that we are going to have to take a look at and work on getting figured out.
I have
Okay.
no other questions, Mr. Leonard. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Galvin. We appreciate your questions. Ms. Sutton, is there anybody in the audience who has their hand up to ask questions?
Honestly, can we take the screen down for just a moment, please?
I didn't know if anybody would want to see another slide.
Thank
so-
you. Oh, no, Jen, we can go back to it. I just needed to see if any of the attendees have their hands up, and they do not. Our panelist does, though. Is that Tim?
I can't see anybody on my screen. except-
Yeah,
Tim
it's me.
does. Tim,
Mr. Leonard, thank you. I just wanted to, and Mr. Mullen's correct. I do have many thoughts on parking and transit and mode share, but I will save those for the town's opportunity to testify. I just wanted to mention to Ms. Pike and to the applicant and to Mr. Galvin, the parking occupancy and turnover in East Milton Square is perhaps one of the most studied issues in town. So in addition to the Howard Stein Hudson study from 2010, I actually did a study in collaboration with MAPC about parking turnover occupancy in 2015. And then the beta group, I think it was either 2018 or 2019, did a curb utilization study that looked at parking occupancy and turnover. And so I can provide all of that information to the board, to Ms. Pike, to anyone who wants it for some more updated information about that issue.
Yeah, that would be very much appreciated by
Yes.
by all parties.
Yes, thank you very much.
So Tim, if you could supply that to Ms. Pike and perhaps file a copy of it with the board, so we'll have it as part of the record of the proceeding. That would be very helpful.
John,
Yes.
John, can I ask one more question?
Yes.
I feel like the feedback that the applicant's getting now is at a high level and is providing some themes. So along the lines of what Mr. Zawinski offered, I want to just mention one more point. I feel like this pre-pandemic data is helpful for a baseline, but I don't know that we can accurately predict, at least in the near term, perhaps even for the next several years, what the post-pandemic traffic's going to look like. And I wonder if the applicant would give some thought to what that really means and how that might affect the projections. I know that at least Secretary Pollack had mentioned this several times, and I think MassDOT has started a study on.
They have, yes.
But you're looking at, MBTA load factors that are significantly depressed, and I expect it will be depressed for quite a while. I'm concerned that in a place like East Milton Square, with all that excess excess traffic on the expressway cutting through Granite, we could see worsening conditions with respect to those levels of service that were projected following the deck project. So I don't know that there are any answers, but just in terms of the broad issues that I think ought to at least be addressed or at least thought through, I'd like to give some thought to what that might mean.
All right, we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful. Jeffrey, when would you expect a study like the one that has just gotten underway to take to finalization? And in the interim, while the study is progressing, is that information that's being studied available to Ms. Pike and other interested persons?
She may have it. I don't know. She's probably closer to it than I. I will tell you that, most people are a little bit concerned about what the catalogs say about, trip generation. Just it's so tricky, it's going to be a while, and I don't know. Ms. Pike probably has some better data than I.
I think I may have a connection with the folks who are doing the study, so I may be able to, sort of informally connect and see what I can, I'm not sure how far along they are, so they may not have anything that they can tell me that is, helpful or conclusive, but I can certainly inquire.
Yeah. There aren't going to be answers to this problem for a while, John. And but I don't think we can complete our analysis unless we at least evaluate and give it some thought. Certainly it will be better when people are comfortable getting back on the MBTA, but you know, commuter rail's at 8%. So if you live in Rockland and you would taking the commuter rail into South Station, you're now on the Southeast Expressway. What can I say? And that affects East Milton.
Well, and the other thing maybe that may be true too is that I know, and I'll speak from my own personal experience here, that I think a lot of people are considering, especially professionals like me, are considering that working from home is actually going very well. And I would love not to have to be able to commute to downtown Boston more than maybe a day or two a week. So I think we may, that's another thing to factor in, is that if people's jobs allow them to do that, I think there may be more people that are taking advantage of not having to have a commute. So, but I will make some inquiries and see if I can get any information about the ongoing study that MassDOT's doing.
Ms. Pike, from my recollection, I don't recall that our peer review consultant got into those issues as part of his peer review report. And if I'm mistaken, forgive me. But if I'm right, then in a couple of weeks or maybe a little bit longer, we'll be having peer review testimony from Mr. Dirk.
Mm-hmm.
Feel free that if you want to discuss these issues with him or contact him or cooperatively review the issue, feel free to do so.
Okay.
That will expedite your final report and hopefully expedite the project.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. So we have no other person present who wants to ask questions on traffic. Ms. Corcoran, let me ask you, do you have another witness to present or?
No, that's it for the witnesses for tonight, but I was hoping to address one of Mr. Mullins' points, if I may.
Well, of course you can. He knows more about transportation than most people on the broadcast, with the exception, of course, of Ms. Pike.
Well, I know. I think he just brought up a really great point. Actually, I was hoping that Mr. Serwinski was going to bring this up because he had some excellent comments about, in the spirit of multimodal transportation. And I know that obviously the pandemic is a major hiccup in public transit utilization, which is a real shame because I think that, especially people who tend to, live in apartment communities, I think have a greater tendency to be like living smaller, as they say. So, less car utilization, less wanting to be in traffic. The benefit of taking a long bus ride in the morning is you can be working from your phone the whole time or on Instagram, whatever you want to do on there. So it's a lot less stressful than being behind the wheel of a car on 93 in rush hour traffic. But the thing that I was hoping that Mr. Sherwinski was going to weigh in. So one of the comments that we received from the planning department was about bikes. And increasing the number of bikes that we can park on the site. And we've been talking internally about a few different options for that. Increasing the private bike parking spaces that are inside the garage and inside the building, but also looking into the possibility of, bike shares that, the blue bikes. I know that they're not in Milton yet, I believe. But that would be something that we'll definitely look into. And that's a, pandemic friendly type of thing. Although the bike shares, I've been a little bit weirder about them during the pandemic, but I've seen people on them still, which gives me hope that they'll make a comeback when everybody's vaccinated. But I think that that's a fantastic suggestion and one that we're really taking into consideration. And, I'm always very jealous of cities that have lovely bike infrastructure because it really is a more pleasant way to travel than single-use cars, which we won't get into this too much, but I'm really not into cars, especially in denser settings. I think that hopefully the world is headed into a time where, car usage is less, personal car usage, because it's just wildly inefficient. So we're looking into that. We're also, one thing that we can have to encourage, different types of transportation is in a lot of these buildings, they'll have in the lobby kind of a transportation TV screen that gives you the wait times for buses, the trains if they're around. One thing that maybe we could do to deter people from traveling at peak hours is list the drive time to Boston using Google Maps. I think if people took one look at that in the morning and said, you know, it's going to take me an hour and a half to get in there right now from Milton, like, why don't I work from home for the morning and get in for the lunch shift or something like that? So there are a lot of kind of creative measures that we can take that we've seen be successful in other apartment communities. Obviously, Attorney Galvin's points about, you know, the buses and how reliable they are and how often they are available is definitely something that we want to get a little smarter on and look into a little bit better, because obviously the MBTA can say that they run a certain number of times, but that on the ground experience is really where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So all these things are definitely things that we can look into, and we're happy to kind of, you know, these types of, you know, moving people analyses and ideas and stuff aren't really part of the traffic impact study, but we can definitely provide some ancillary, you know, plans or ideas that might help the board reach their decision. Just to give you a sense of, you know, when the building is up and running, how are we going to encourage people to, you know, not contribute to the traffic, and obviously, especially the parking. I think, you know, having, you know, a UPS truck and a uniform truck parked right outside somebody's window, I think also points to kind of the eyes on the street that this building will offer. So with more people invested in, you know, these issues that are plaguing East Milton Square, I mean, I'm a glass half full kind of gal, and I kind of see that as an opportunity for progress rather than, you know, adding to a problem. Because if you have a UPS truck parked outside your house, you know, making noise every single day, I think you're gonna, you know, maybe even call UPS and tell them, you know, the driver number or something. You know, that's what I would probably do. So I'm just trying to look at this in a way that, you know, again, just to go back to being part of the solution rather than contributing to the problem. That's what we're really interested in doing, and we're willing to kind of provide any materials that will, you know, support that.
Well, good. I appreciate your comments very much. Mr. Mullen is an expert on traffic and transportation, and he's also known to be a biker of all things. So I'm sure he's thrilled with
A lot of cyclists in here. I love it.
About well, this is Milton, isn't it? But no, thank you for your comments. They're very helpful. Now, you have no other witnesses to present this evening.
Not tonight, no.
Okay. Our next scheduled hearing on this case is May 6th, but I did write to Mr. Freeman and to Mr. Galvin this afternoon, indicating that the Ice House application, which was going to be heard on April 29th, 1 week from tonight, have asked that application be continued for a few weeks. So we now have April 29th as an available date for this particular hearing. Let me ask you, number one, do you want to proceed to the hearing on the 29th and keep things moving? And number two, if you do, how many additional witnesses do you intend to present, and how much time do you think you'll take on the 29th?
So I just heard about the 29th today. And so we've been trying to actually, I was gonna ask the board actually, maybe, you know, if you have any ideas for further, you know, whether we want to explore some of the ideas that were brought up tonight, perhaps. I mean, keeping in mind that we'll have a week to kind of prepare this, you know, a lot of the stuff is stuff that we've been ruminating on anyway. So it might not be as fully baked as maybe, you know, it could be if we were to discuss these things, you know, after the peer review or something, but I would hate to waste the opportunity for a hearing if there was something that you think would be, you know, beneficial in kind of moving the discussion along.
Well, looking at a letter that I received, it appears that you have a landscape architect, and do you intend to have the landscape architect present at the next hearing?
She could be if need be. So we discussed kind of the landscape in the realm of the design during this meeting. We can always go more in depth. I'm not sure if that would, you know, warrant necessarily its own meeting.
It probably wouldn't, but it may be helpful to have the landscape architect. There's questions from Mr. Galvin regarding the terrace and the plantings, and maybe you'll have an update on the some information relating to the passageway. And so I think we can make some progress. I just hate to continue that because our next hearing, as I see it, the scheduled hearing, is the 6th. And that's we're getting into the peer reviews. That's the peer review traffic.
Excuse me, Chair Leonard?
Yeah.
It's Bev.
Yeah, yes, Cliff. Yes,
That formality just sounds so strange to me. Anyway, May 6th is the same week of town meeting, which is May 3rd, I believe.
Yep.
And I spoke to the selectman's office and they would prefer that they have the whole week.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's too bad. I thought that the present schedule for the town meeting was the 3rd, 4th, and the 5th.
But I believe it is right. And you're looking at the 6th?
Yeah, the next day.
They thought that you might be taking a chance with that, but perhaps we can just go ahead with it and it can be.
Let me ask you, we won't know then till the evening of the 5th. Is that
correct? Yeah, I guess there's a lot going on. Anyway, that was the conclusion.
Okay, that's helpful. Let me Bev, let me do this. Mr. Mullen, what do you think? Do you want to take a shot at the 6th and keep that date, or do you just want to suggest we pass over it and reschedule?
I think you should schedule it, and then you can reschedule it if you can cancel it if we have a town meeting conflict.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Nick, what do you have to say about the proposed hearing on the 6th? Do you want to keep it on for the present time?
I agree with Mr. Mullen.
Okay. The only difficulty, Judy Barrett is not with us tonight.
Yes, I am.
Yes, yes.
Oh, you are? You got back?
I'm in 2 meetings again, John.
Oh,
Story of my life.
now we're all in trouble, folks.
So all I was going to say is that if you can, you may want to keep that May 6th date in the calendar and assess what happens with town meeting when town meeting happens. And I say that because that's the night that the peer review traffic consultant is supposed to present to the board. And just in light of the number of issues that I think the neighborhood has raised around, the conflicts with businesses, business parking, and also some of the businesses in that area whose existing special permits kind of require access to some on-street parking, parking, on this site or on the street that may be compromised by this project. I think you want to keep that May 6th date if you can. It's been really hard to schedule the peer review consultants. So as I explained, at the last meeting, everybody's really busy, just like you guys are. And so if we can, I'd like to keep that May 6th date. And if we need to move it, we need to move it, in which case it would be the 20th.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So it would be the 20th?
Yes. Yeah, because the
Okay.
13th is committed to the other project with which we're alternating on Thursday nights.
Okay, just so long as there's an alternate date so that, people reserve that as well, so that it's not a mad scramble if the
Right.
6th doesn't come off.
The
And
20th.
the site civil peer review is scheduled for that night as well, and there's no reason why the two couldn't be done together. So if you had to move traffic to the 20th, I think you could do it, but
Okay.
let's hope that the 6th, then
That
everybody
makes
can see
sense.
each other at town meeting, and it all ends in 2 nights.
That makes sense.
Okay, that does make sense. Nick, are you in agreement with that schedule?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so what we'll do then is we'll continue this particular hearing. Let me just ask, is there any other business that anyone wants to discuss that we haven't discussed? I don't know of any such issues. And I hear nothing. I don't hear any suggestions from anyone. So if we continue this hearing to the 29th, we'll have a presentation by the landscape architect. And we'll also have some, perhaps an additional period of comments by Ms. Corcoran on some of the issues that have been raised, that some may have been resolved, some of the may be requiring further study or whatever, but we can have an update from her as to where we are on that date. And then we will get involved in the peer review of the project. Does that sound sensible to everyone?
That works.
Mr. Galvin, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good, because I think, but you correct me, it's your case. I think it's probably, it may be time efficient, but I don't think it's fair for you to be heard if you want to introduce evidence on this application one way or the other, to have you do something on the 29th before the peer reviews have taken place. It seems to me that it'd be better to have the peer reviews take place. You can read the peer review reports, listen to the people testify, and then at some later date, make your presentation. Does that?
Yes, we would prefer to wait
That's
until
fair.
after the peer review date because the peer review may resolve some of the issues that we have, and then we would be, more narrow in our comments.
I think that's right, and you're very experienced in this area, as Mr. Freeman is, and I'm sure Ms. Quirk is. But I don't have to tell you, but I'll say it. Then don't be bashful, and I don't think you will be. If you want to get involved in the peer review process, either yourself or with experts that you may be consulting with, or whatever, so that you're part of that process. It's intended to be I think it's intended to be a comprehensive process, and the more you participate along with other people, I think the better we'll get to where we should be on this application. So
Very good. Thank you.
is that fine with you? Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to continue this hearing until April 29th, a week from today, with the understanding that it may be a relatively brief hearing, but at least we'll make whatever progress we can. Is that all right with you, Ms. Corcoran?
Certainly.
Okay, so if we have nothing else to come before the board, we're going to suspend this hearing until April 29th at 7 o'clock in the evening for the landscape architecture and another presentation or commentary or update by Ms. Corcoran. And if you have any revisions of plans or revisions of submitted testimony, feel free to submit that to the board in advance if you want to do that, and that will tend to move things along. All right.
Sounds good.
Great. Okay. So thank you everyone for participating. Bev, do you want to be heard? No.
No.
Okay. It's 9:05, and so I will see everyone on the 29th at 7 o'clock, and wish everyone the best for the upcoming week.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.